We have 1 week left ranked, and I know exactly what you are looking for. Let's talk about the best decks right now in the format. So for the first off, the very best deck, yes, it's going to be Darkrai Giratina. It's a very consistent deck that's, been a mainstay since Shining Reverie when it got introduced to us. And with the addition of Silver, just another support card the game or like the deck can utilize. Yeah, it's just very strong. This is like, it is what it is, bro. It's just very consistent. You don't have stuff like Masquerada that like used to kind of hold it back, bro, and like Celestial Guardians, even though it was still a very strong deck then. It has pretty bad matchups and the stuff like the Eevee Box that can be iffy. Buzzwole can beat it definitely, and then stuff like that. But yeah, it has some losing matchups, but at the end of the day, dude, we have like nothing that like super beats it. It's just like a fast Charizard, but a fast Charizard beats everything. And yeah, 2 Rocky Helmets, 1 Giant Cape. Like, even though Oricorio was like very meta relevant, Rocky Helmet plus Darkrai chip just gets the job done. You don't need something like Kamala. Yeah, you basically you have 2 basics, or you have 4 basics, and you have room for like every single good support card in the game, at least 1 copy. Deck's been doing what it's been doing, man. And let's just move on to the next deck. So Buzzwole is a very strong deck right now in the current meta. There is a lot of different ways to run this deck. Personally, my favorite is going to be the 2 Pheromosas. The build I've been running personally is going to be something like this with 2 Leaf Capes instead of a Guzma. I'm gonna have a red actually. Although there are a lot of different variants. Before, let's get into why Buzz is good. So, Buzz is doing the same thing. It's a very consistent deck. Also, it's only basic Pokemon. You have Pheromosa for the bench snipes. You have stuff like Elucimine for Buzzwole to be the main attacker. And you have stuff like Celesteela to swap around your Pokemon. Also take hits like when necessary. And yeah. Grass deck, Erica. So personally, the build I've been using, I've been the minus Rocky Helmet. This is the build I've been using with a red Leaf Cape. I've been using red card actually instead of Mars. I don't really like having Mars when I need to use something like Lucamine or an Erica in the same turn. So I usually like to run red card personally in this deck. I have seen some people run Mars. It's a personal preference. Yeah, it's just a very strong deck. There are a couple different ways to run it. Like some people, some people do play Guzma over red. You could 100% do that. There's also the Cortana builds with the 1/1 Pheromosa. So if you want to run like this version is like basically better against stuff like Oricorio. You have the original version with like the 1 Leaf Cape, the 1 Rocky Helmet as well, which is also very popular. There are a lot of different ways to run the deck. Also, if you are playing 1 Cortana, people usually like split up the 1 Cyrus into a 1 Sabrina as well. So yeah, a lot of ways to play Buzzwole, and every one of them is just very strong into the current meta. Next up, we have one of my favorites, Guzzlord. So this is kind of like the stable version that everybody like kind of just uses as like a baseline. However, some people are starting to only run stuff like 1 Nihilego now to make room for that extra support card and 1 Celesteela, because with the Noggin Delves, like you don't really need the second Nihilego. You definitely can play it, and some people still are playing it. I'm just telling you all the options. All right, no, I've been actually just playing 2 Celesteela. I really like 2 Celesteela. I really hate getting trapped in Guzzlord. I know it's not the most optimal way or the most popular anymore. I think, double Celesteela really shined back into the Silvally format back in ED Crisis. I still think it is very fine. Now you can do something like this. Some people are even playing Poison or Rocky Helmets over Poison Barbs. I think either one of them are fine options. The Rocky Helmet is nice because, stuff like Pheromosa, like Buzzwole, is going to be the worst matchup. Pheromosa only has 70 HP. Nagano does baseline 50 if you don't have a Nihilego. So if they actually attack into a Rocky Helmet, Nagano can get the revenge KO if they don't have a Leaf Cape on them. For flex slots, I've seen some people taking up the Mars/Sabrina and adding a bunch of variety of options where you just look at the support list and basically go through them. So I've seen some people take out those cards. Basically, this is kind of like the standard version with like these cards, and like the Rocky Helmets can be Poison Barbs. And just as cards I have seen some people play, obviously, like we already covered, Sabrina is going to be one of them. We have other stuff like Mars. We already did cover Mars. That was in the original list, but some people have been taking in stuff like Team Rocket Grunt. Combine that with Ground Core, give you a higher chance. Although I personally like actually adding stuff like either PCL. PCL is very nice. I have seen some lists actually playing 3 item cards. A Giant Cape is kind of nice because a lot of Charizards are running red now to actually one-shot Guzzlord. Plus the extra HP can be very tanky, like nice in other matchups. You also have options such as Will to be able to guarantee a grind core if we can find it up here. Also Guzma, is another fine option to play. But yeah, some people have been playing stuff like Will. Obviously, Silver is a very strong support card. So kind of just like, this is like the baseline for the deck, whether you play Rocky or you play Poison Barbs, and then like those last 3 attack options are kind of like up to you. Do you want like an extra Nihilego? Do you want an extra Celesteela? Then you have room for either 2 or 3 support cards depending on the Pokemon ratios. There obviously is the version that does not play Nagandel, and usually it looks something like this with like the 2 Stilla. I've seen also some people play the U1 Nihilego only in that list also. And usually this list kind of consumes of stuff like Will. You have like Guzma, Sabrina in there. I'm not too familiar with like the exact ratios, but essentially it's just like a more defensive version with the Rocky helmet. Probably definitely a cape, couple PCLs, to be able to tank more hits. And yeah, definitely think Nagandel is better, like a better version in this format. But that doesn't mean the other version can't work, and there are definitely some people who are having success with it. One of the strongest decks in the format is going to be Espeon. So Espeon kind of has like a weird position where it's a very strong deck, but it has some very bad matchups into the top meta. Darkrai is bad, not as bad as I used to think. I think the matchup can be even, especially, with the Sylveon and Espeon. Although, I still think if you don't draw like one turn right or one turn goes wrong, Darkrai is probably just going to win anyways. But it is definitely doable. Bad matchup stuff like Guzz and the Charizard. So the 10 Pokemon lineup with the 2 non-EX, both Espeon and Sylveon, are basically standard. And then, the flex loss in this deck are really going to be the red card plus the silver. And what are people running besides those? So some people honestly take out the red card, play 2 silver. We've seen that with the Froggy X Winter Salar. Some people are taking out one of these, putting a giant cape in and playing stuff like silver as well, or even something like a Mars. So like I said, this is essentially the baseline for the 18 card package. The other 2 flex slots, some people do actually end up playing a double Eevee bag. It all depends on personal preference. I personally do like the red card plus silver. I like using that as a combo if I actually do manage to draw them. I like just having access to hand disruption. I like having access to red card in case of like Sylveon Professor Research and find it in like a scenario where I'm facing like a bad matchup and I might need to basically pair the red card bricks. However, there are multiple ways to play, and those last 2 flex slots are really up to you. I've also seen a lot of people starting to play red and even something like Team Rocket Grunt. So those are a couple additional options for support cards if you do want to try them out. Next up is going to be the OG Eevee Box. As this is a Leafeon Flareon one. So this was kind of like the standard version last set. However, there are some changes. People are actually going back to Genetic Apex Flareon. Just because Oricorio is way more meta relevant, this Flareon has a way easier time to deal with it, because once you get it set up, not only can it knock out the Oricorios, but mostly, like most of these Oricorio decks have Pokemon under 110 HP, so it can actually get multiple KOs and also just not easily die. Like 120 HP, you can throw a giant cape and you can live. So I've seen some people just playing like this. However, some people have been taking in something like a Dawn to be able to basically, go into that Flareon faster, or like weird situations where you can't use a Leafeon to swap out. And they usually end up taking out the Mars because like with the Dawn, you could do like, fast KOs with Flareon EX and stuff like that. And like, why hand disrupt them when you could just win the game? And you might be wondering, well, if we're playing pure fire energy, why would you play Dawn over elemental switch? And the answer to that is we are playing Leafeon. Sometimes you won't be able to elemental switch the grass energy you may need to Dawn onto a Pokemon. But other than that, it's a very strong deck. It beats stuff like Guzzlord, Buzzwole, and Darkrai. It definitely actually beats Espeon. Flareon EX is a very strong card in the Espeon. If the Eevee Box plus red, it's very easy to get that one shot on them. Problem with this deck consistently, sometimes not leading an early Leafeon can be very detrimental. And the Ori matchup can still be rough, even if the Dawn plus Flareon combo can be 100% annoying, because sometimes you are only playing one answer to Ori. If you can't find that on the bottom of the deck, even, with the draw support from the Find the Friend Eevee and the Sylveon, it's going to be annoying. And yeah, but it's a very strong deck regardless. It just lacks some consistency sometimes and has like an annoying matchup in the Ori. But a lot of decks kind of have an annoying matchup in the Ori in certain situations, so like it kind of just is what it is. But yes, it's a very strong deck at the end of the day. So for the final Eevee Box deck, we actually have a pure Flareon deck that plays, both the Find the Friend Eevee, Eevee EX. We want 4 Eevees because we were playing 4 Flareons. We have Magby to be able to ramp up the energy, very good going first, set up the energy, very good going second to be able to attack very next turn with either Flareon or Flareon EX. The one Sylveon, because we are playing 4 Eevees, we could utilize one as basically an additional Professor Research. Then some lists are playing 1 red. I've seen some playing 2, just get that one shot. It's kind of like the same situation I was talking about. You don't really need hand disruption if you kind of just win the game and one shot everything. A Flareon doing 150 damage is going to one shot most things in the meta. You can't bind that for Eevee back doing up to 160. Very crazy, dude. one Sabrina is always nice, you know, just for disruption, or, you know, Sabrina can get the KO. And you even have obviously the 2 Pokeballs. Yeah, it's one of those big Pokemon decks. Like, yeah, this deck can definitely struggle going first. Like, if you don't start with Magby, that is just, you know, the weakness of playing like baby Pokemon decks like this. But besides that, dude, it's very strong. You know, stronger than stuff like Espeon. Flareon is a very strong card with almost like everything in the meta. You know, even high damage. And yeah, it's a very solid, strong deck. And yeah, I'm very happy to see more like Eevee Box decks doing really good. Next on, I'm going to be moving on to the tried and true Silvally Oricorio. This one is playing the classic Zeraora. We have the Dawn, 2 Gladions, the 2 Giovannis. Giovanni's very nice to be able to attack with these 60 HP Pokemon. You know, if you go second, knock out something that hasn't evolved yet. Or, you know, if you start first with Zeraora, having access to 2 Geo, so you actually kind of like start with Zeraora going first, and the Giovanni is nice. Also very nice on Silvally, hitting that 110 damage. And yeah, it's the same things Silvally been doing, man. I'm gonna be honest, it's the exact same Zeraora list we've seen for like the last 2 seasons. So I'm going to move on to the other variant, which is going to actually be basically playing Pichu. And because they're playing Pichu, they're kind of just playing a little bit less stuff. Like, they're only playing 1 Geo because, you know, you're not going to be starting with the Zeraora going first to be able to get a free KO. Geo is still obviously nice to have, but it's not going to be needed to have it in your opening hand at 24/7. So instead of that, they're playing stuff like Silver and Guzma to make up for those lost cards. And because we really don't need Dawn, because, you know, we have Pichu lead, we also have room for like an additional scorecard, which is obviously going to be the Silver/Guzma. And yeah, it's a very strong deck. You know, Silvally being able to attack first, or Silvally being able to attack second going first, is very powerful, bro, and is going to knock out a lot of things in the meta, bro. Like, specifically very good against the EVs. The only way for the EVs to survive is for an EVX to be in the active, place a giant cape on it. Even then, it's still very annoying to end up playing around because Silvally, you know, just does 100 damage consistently. Also, Oricorio was just very good in the meta. This meta is very EX dominated. Obviously, like a lot of decks, you have answers like Rocky Helmets, Darkrai Chip, you know, the non-EX evolutions in the Eevee Box decks. But Oricorio is still a card that, you know, a lot of decks have to play around. So yeah, Oricorio is a strong man. Combining it, you know, just with a way to make Silvally better going first, extremely powerful. Speaking about Oricorio decks, however, are actually not Oricorio, I mean, more Silvally decks. We actually have a new Silvally deck. So we have Magby, Darkrai, Silvally. This doesn't have to be Magby. This could be a Pichu because, you know, it does not matter what energy. You're just using it for a baby Pokemon. So you can play 1 Magby, 1 Pichu. It's whatever you want to do. Dude, this deck is actually crazy in rank. Like, this deck be pissing me off. I think this deck is extremely strong in the stuff like Espeon. I think this deck is just extremely strong. Going first, being able to attack with Silvally with a baby Pokemon start, extremely strong. Going second, be able to attack with Darkrai right away with a baby Pokemon on the very next turn, extremely strong. You have 2 leaves in case, you know, you do start with Darkrai. You want to be able to swap that out 100%. You might be able to get away with playing 1. Then you have Mars, Cyrus, Sabrina, bro, the average support cards they could just kind of like use right away that are also like very useful for Silvally. Then the 1 giant cave, just, you know, whenever you need to place it on a Darkrai, letting you hit like stuff like a Flareon with red. Or like even Silvally, sometimes putting a giant cape on that is extremely useful to live an extra hit. But yeah, dude, like once you get Silvally going, you have a Darkrai on the bench. Just Silvally outputting 120 damage is actually so annoying. I hate this deck because I feel like every time I'm on a win streak, bro, this deck ruins my win streak. So I definitely recommend playing this deck. Although, you know, sometimes you can break, you can go for a snow baby Pokemon. Maybe like even a Darkrai lead, no leaf can be annoying. However, the God roll in the fast games kind of make up for it. Speaking of baby high roll decks, we have Pichu, Oricorio, Zeraora. I mean, we've already been talking about how strong Oricorio is. You know, you have Zeraora, you have the 2 elemental switches, and you have Arceus with the Pichu. So you have a very strong way to consistently get Arceus fast online. And then, you know, besides this card, you have the Giovanni, let Arceus do 140 damage, which will one-shot, you know, obviously stuff like Espeon or the other 140 HP EX Pokemon, such as like Darkrai. And then because we're only playing 8 Pokemon, we have so much room for supporter. We have Silver, Sabrina, Cyrus, Geo. We have the giant cave to put on Arceus, or even stuff like the Oricorio in certain situations. And we have the 1 leaf down here just for the bad Arceus starts. Even though like Arceus starts are not even bad sometimes, like going second, you could like have Zeraora, bro, an elemental switch and still attack and be fine. Going first kind of annoying, but like the leaf can balance that out hopefully. And yeah, dude, I've been God rolled by this deck so many times, and it is definitely a very strong deck, you know, because you also have access to Oricorio at the end of the day. If you can't find the Arceus fast, the Oricorio can stall long enough for that Arceus to be online after the Ori is maybe even knocked out or just switches out. So moving on to the Greninja decks, we have the tried and true Sylveon Greninja. It is a still very strong deck. However, definitely to get balanced out, has some bad matchups now. Definitely way more even than what it was. So this is kind of like the standard build of the giant cape, you know, the two Cyruses, the Professor Research Rare Candies. This is basically the baseline. The last two cards are up to you. I've seen some decks personally be running stuff like Irida. I've also been seeing some decks run stuff like, you know, PCL even, Guzma, Red, even like stuff like Pokecom sometimes, you know, for the additional consistency. The last two cards are really up to you, however you want to build the deck. This is kind of like the baseline. And definitely don't think it's the best deck by any means. It is still a strong deck 100%. You know, going second, you have the Sylveon draw power, the Greninjas, you have the access to the Cyrus to be able to disrupt your opponent. Can 100% be strong. And yeah, not the #1 best deck anymore like it was in Eevee's Grove. But just because it's not #1 doesn't mean it's not good enough to be played. This is definitely a top 1000 worthy deck. Speaking about Greninja, we have the second Greninja deck. We have the Simon deck, aka Oricorio Greninja. So this deck is definitely on the slower side. So this deck is mainly played with, you know, electric and water. You basically just use Sylveon as a draw engine. You have Giratina, you know, as a fast attacker, or not a fast attacker, but a charge up large attacker. And this is a pretty slow deck. Like, this deck can get steamrolled by stuff like Espeon, just because, you know, it is very easy for Espeon usually to knock out the Oricorios with the two non-EX Pokemon. However, it is still very strong, you know, in ranked, and it can be very strong against like stuff like Darkrai because you have the Iridas to let Oricorio just like basically always live. The Greninja pings for the additional damage. Pretty sure it's good in the stuff like Buzz too. Obviously, Guzz like kind of farms it if they get Nogandel. However, still a nice deck. This is kind of like the traditional lift the Mars Irida and the double Cyrus, you know, because double Greninja. I've seen some taking out the Giratina. I still think, you know, it's a pretty nice option because we don't really have other Greninja decks. You don't have to really worry about it getting sniped. I guess you can buy like Pheromosa, but in that matchup, like unless you start it, you don't have to place it down. So it's just like very, you know, it's like a deck that's like very good into the meta currently. There are some versions like not running Giratina, playing the Pyukumuku, or like even not even playing the Sylveon package and playing like Pyukumuku instead. So that is like another way to run the deck. However, I've seen the Sylveon version be more consistently played. Next up, we're going to have Darkrai Ho Oh Snorlax. Or like, this is like a weird deck. This is not a deck that is played by a lot. It's mainly only like the top meta. I think this deck is actually pretty hard to pilot. I was having trouble playing this myself. And yeah, it's basically, you know, you have Snorlax in the active. Sometimes you don't even use Snorlax in the active. You could just put Ho in the active, build it up, do stuff like that, charge up Snorlax in the back, or even the Darkrai. You have the stuff like Lara, Leaf, you know, double Ilima, double PCL. I've seen some decks actually like taking out the red card and running like double Leaf or like double something like that. But you know, the red card is nice for hand disruption. Even play maybe something like Amaros as well. Yeah, this is like a very tanky deck. You know, it kind of is like good in the stuff like Darkrai Giratina. You know, can't do good in the Oricorio because you have the Rocky Helmet plus Darkrai. I heard it like farms Espeon and also stuff like Buzzwole. So I think it's a very strong deck, very hard to play, very defensive, and it's going to take a lot of time because you are playing a very long grind game. However, I did want to mention on the list, definitely don't recommend this to inexperienced players, but it is always an option and it is a very strong deck, so I still wanted to include it in this video. And the final deck, we have Charizard. If you're looking for the easiest deck to play, definitely play this. I mean, it's Charizard, where you just basically use Sylveon, you get Charizard in the active spot, you click attack, you put the lilies on it. The only difference from last set is you're playing red now to basically be able to one-shot stuff like Guzzlord, because Guzzlords usually don't run a giant cape. Some of them do, most like 90% of the time, they really don't. Red, you know, unless you do 170 damage. And just beat them, and yeah, it's just Zard, man. You attack, Lily up, maybe use the red, maybe use the sprint, and I put the giant cape on it, bruh. Man, you just pray to draw and then you win the game. Honestly, Zard kind of just beats everything in the meta. The only problem is sometimes you just don't find Zard. But the deck is very consistent, you know, with the EVs. This is actually supposed to be the other Eevee. Not supposed to be this one. It's actually supposed to be the find the friend Eevee, just because you actually want to find Pokemon most of the time. Like, you either want to find the Sylveons to go into, or you find the Charizards in case you have the rare candies. So this is the correct list. Anyways, that does it for all the top decks that I personally think are the best to play in top 1000. And these are the decks that I'm seeing the most played against myself. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Remember, these deck lists aren't always 100%. You basically take the baseline, is why I was kind of like mentioning the flex loss in all these decks. Take the baseline, put the cards that you are the most comfortable with, or you think are going to be the best because of the certain matchups you're playing against. And then if you ever need to change them because you're starting to play other matchups, you could always do that. Hope this video was useful. Let me know in the comments. Peace out. Have a lovely day as always.